Welcome to Beyond the Headlines, the Post and Courier's Clemson and South Carolina football season preview. I'm Gene Sapakoff. I have been with the Post and Courier as college sports editor and a columnist or a beat writer since 1986. To put some perspective there, Clemson and South Carolina at Death Valley in 1986 finished in a 21-21 tie. So it's been all even for me ever since. But now, enough about me. The stars of the show, David Cloninger and John Blau, the Post and Courier's excellent beat reporters. David, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
I'm David Cloninger from Rock Hill, South Carolina. Cover South Carolina athletics. Been doing it off and on for 26 years. So looking forward to another football season.
Hi, yeah, this is John Blau. I'm the Clemson reporter. And Gene, if you started in 1986, I was 1 year old in Southern New Jersey. Grew up on Rocky movies and hoagies, not subs. And I came here from Bloomington, Indiana about a year ago. So I've a year on the beat.
Well, that's great, guys. On this show, folks, we do not beat around the bush. We're going to start with the dramatic conclusion right at the start. So, David, let's talk season records. What do you project for the Gamecocks in 2022, coming off a 7-6 season and a Duke's Mayo Bowl rout of the North Carolina Tar Heels?
Well, I'll say that I expect South Carolina to be much improved because they have much more talent. However, more talent doesn't necessarily mean more wins. I think maybe if they improve to a 7-5 regular season, that would be considered improvement. And I think, crazy things happen in bowls. So I would think I'm starting with 7-5 as a benchmark. It may be 8-5 after the bowl game. It may be 7-6 like they were last year. But I think they get one more win in the regular season than they did last year because, again, with the more talent, and they do have a lot more talent, it's still a very, very tough schedule.
John, how about for the Tigers coming off of a 10-3 season that most people would consider disappointing inside and outside the Clemson family? What do you see for 2022 for Dabo Swinney and company?
I think last season was a perfect example of why I hate predictions, because you have absolutely no idea what is going to happen. I can tell you I do, but I don't. Obviously, if they stay healthier than they did last year, I think Vegas has put it at about 10.5. I would take the over if I was a betting person, just because, again, half the injuries, you have more experience, especially on the offensive line and the skill players on offense. And then defensively, I mean, it's just one of the better defenses in college football. There's no doubt about it, especially what they got coming back on the defensive line. You win battles in the trenches, and they should be better offensively in that department, and they should be great defensively in that department.
So your record prediction there, Blau?
Oh, let me say 11. I'll go 11. I said over, but I'll say 11. There's one loss in there somewhere. I don't know where it is, but we'll see. Maybe Notre Dame.
All right, that's pretty good. Quarterbacks is always kind of like the default conversation piece at this time of year, but for these particular programs, I mean, there is a lot going on there. Let's start in Columbia. Tell us, you've been around the practices all spring. Spencer Rattler was what's his improvement track been like since he got to Columbia as pretty much, to me, the prize transfer portal guy in all of college football?
Who are you talking about? Spencer who? Yeah.
That kid from Oklahoma.
Obviously, Spencer Rattler upgrades this position significantly. Nothing against the four guys who started at quarterback last year, but this is a guy who comes in, he gets the ball day one as your starting quarterback, as your team leader. And from all reports, he has lived up to that ever since he enrolled. From the limited time we've gotten to watch him at practice, you can see it's out there, the command, the leadership, just the know-how of, hey, I'm going to be able to do this. And from a purely technical standpoint, I don't know if this would fit into an actual NFL scouting report, but kid can spin it. He can absolutely spin it. So that's going to be something very exciting to watch. But it's a case of he's got a lot around him. He's got a lot of talent to really push South Carolina forward, but it's got to be held up in front of him with the offensive line. That's why I wrote about that, recently, and saying it goes nowhere if the line doesn't do its job. But right now, Spencer Rattler is the story in South Carolina, and that should stay intact through next week.
John, it's always a two-part question at Clemson, or at least since January 1st, pretty much looking into this season. So first of all, what's your observation with how DJ Uiagalelei has improved, mentally, physically, in every way? And then what about Cade Klubnik, and how has he come along as an early enrollee and really one of the top young quarterback prospects, at least in college football?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the big talk this offseason has been about DJ Uiagalelei's weight loss. I mean, he went from being a 265-pound quarterback to 235. It's noticeable difference. I mean, just even looking at his face, he looks a little bit like a different person. But it was interesting hearing Davis Allen, the tight end, talk about him the other day. And he said everybody talks about his weight and all that quote unquote crap. Like it's not that important. I mean, the big thing for them is just how much he's grown as a leader. In terms of he's someone that leads by example, and with his voice now in terms of being one of the hardest workers in the building. Whether the mechanical issues that he worked on all off season are addressed, whether he's able to make the right reads in the RPO game and make some plays with his legs, and the accuracy is better. I mean, all those things remain to be seen. But yeah, I mean, obviously, like you said with Cade Klubnik, I mean, he's a part of the conversation. That's another 5-star quarterback. Didn't lose a game in high school, which sounds reminiscent to everyone. When they hear about that, they think of Trevor Lawrence. And obviously, if things don't go well, it could be a very similar situation to going back to the Kelly Bryant era, transitioning to Trevor Lawrence. So don't know what will happen, but the early season will give us a lot of indications. Obviously, Georgia Tech, and then there's some non-conference games there with Furman and Louisiana Tech, where Cade Klubnik's probably going to get plenty of snaps. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
I'm Gene Sapakoff, college sports editor for the Charleston Post and Courier, and I'm with David Cloninger and John Blau, beat writers. I'd like to remind everyone that this thing is being recorded, so if you'd like to view it later, that's cool. And also, if you use the Q&A button on your screen, you can submit questions to us live in this Beyond the Headlines award-winning Post and Courier Clemson and South Carolina football preview. Also, I'd like to tell you guys about just the coolest 2 newsletters that I can think of in college football going on right now. John Blau has one, and you can subscribe at postandcourier.com/subscribe/the_tiger_take. And for David Cloninger's Inside the George Rogers Boulevard, everything you want to know about South Carolina Gamecock sports, not just football, but everything. postandcourier.com/subscribe/Gamecocks now. And David and John, let's talk a little bit about coaching changes or coaching changes that were not made. And David, I'm going to go to you first and just ask you, midway last year to now, if I could transport you from, say, Knoxville, Tennessee to now, are you surprised? Would you have been surprised that Marcus Satterfield is still on the staff? And what can you say about, his coming along as a play caller and how it's gone for him since a pretty darn good end of the season?
Right, Gene. And I think you just hit the nail on the head right there. Winning cures everything. And the South Carolina won 3 of its last 5 games, and it didn't just win it on a last-second field goal or because the other team missed a 4th-down touchdown throw. South Carolina won those games, Auburn, Florida, and North Carolina, pretty convincingly. And a lot of it was because their offensive game plan worked. Particularly in the Duke's Mayo Bowl, every bit of that game plan, which was based on, well, we got to hope this happens. Well, it could happen, but we don't know. Every bit of it worked. It was just crazy. Gene, you were right beside me. And when Dakarian Joyner wound up and threw that first touchdown pass to Jaheim Bell, I just said, I did not expect to see that today. And, had to rewrite my whole story because I figured UNC would get them. But the fact is that, yes, I was a little surprised to see it because after the A&M game particularly, offense was just awful. Had 15 yards through 3 quarters. And A&M's a good team, but they weren't a dominant team. So that did not leave a very good taste, but they looked at it and said, listen, that's Shane's guy. He wants him on staff, and you do have to look at some of the, not excuses, but reasons why the offense struggled so much last year. Notably, you started 4 different quarterbacks. I don't know of many teams that could survive with that and have a winning season, and yet South Carolina did. So they split the difference. Marcus Satterfield did come back, but he was one of only 2 coaches on staff who did not receive a contract extension. And I think the message is left right there within, saying like, listen, they're not going to fire you, but things need to significantly upgrade. And at least from a talent standpoint, things have. So you got to go out there and play him. You got to see what's going to happen. They definitely have more guys to count on, particularly at QB going into the opener, but it'll always be that one thing. As soon as one play doesn't work, as soon as USC doesn't score, as soon as they lose, or if Jordan Birch comes out and tries to throw a touchdown pass from a fullback position, it'll be, oh man, it could get ugly in the offseason.
John Cloninger's right. I was sitting right next to him in Charlotte at the Duke's Mayo Bowl, a noon kickoff after sitting next to you the night before in Orlando at the Cheez-It Bowl. Thank goodness for 6 a.m. direct flights from Orlando to Charlotte. So, John, Wes Goodwin and Brandon Streeter off to a good start. They got a bowl victory. What have you seen from them and in talking to them during fall camp?
Yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, got a little bit of a taste of them being able to call the bowl game, but it's kind of a mystery in terms of how much they will, I guess, digress from what the standard has been or what the scheme has been from Clemson in previous years. Obviously, Brandon Streeter was the quarterback's coach, has been a coordinator himself at Richmond and Liberty, but came here and has been the quarterback's coach for a long time under Tony Elliott and Jeff Scott. And then Wes Goodwin is, kind of a disciple right-hand man of Brent Venables, who none of us heard of, several months ago. And then all of a sudden he's kind of brought out from behind the curtain to be the defensive coordinator. So, in terms of Wes Goodwin, we've heard basically, still going to be, chaos driven, going to be very aggressive in terms of the types of things they employ, but simplifying the playbook to a degree in terms of how they teach it, explain it, hoping that they're simplifying the scheme enough that players can move around quickly, make plays. Brandon Streeter, his focus seems to be tempo. He's talked a lot about wanting to move faster. Obviously, last year there was some inexperience at some of the, the key skill positions. Obviously, DJ Uyunglele among them, and the offensive line and tempo was something they got away from. They want to get back to that, and it's going to be interesting to see how he leans because they think they have improvements along the offensive line. They have 3 running backs, Will Shipley, Kobe Pace, and Phil Maffa, who can really pound it if they want to be more of a ground and pound type of offense. But at the same time, traditionally Clemson's like to air it out. So it's going to be interesting to see kind of how that leans once we get into the season, and we'll find out more about these guys.
John, we're getting a question in the Q&A from Peter. He would like to know, how's Clemson doing in a few suspect areas, special teams and secondary, and I might add secondary depth.
In terms of the secondary, that is I guess I don't know if it's a mystery, but it's something that there are some younger players that are going to have to step up eventually. Sheridan Jones, obviously a guy with a ton of experience as a senior who has started games. That they feel pretty solid about him as a leader in the room, but somebody's got to step up and be across from him. And Nate Wiggins has been the guy that seems to be everybody's really excited about. I think Dabo Swinney called him Nate the Great. Actually admitted that last year as a true freshman had some issues off the field, just not going to class, not doing the things you have to do off the field to be able to play on Saturdays. And he's kind of cleaned that up apparently and has great athleticism. A 6'2" corner who can run with anybody. And they have kind of a hybrid clone of that in Jaden Lucas, who's another freshman. But obviously he's a freshman, so how is he going to perform on Saturdays for the first time? That is a question mark. So it's going to be interesting to see with Lucas, with Wiggins, with Toriano Pride, another freshman, how they all progress. As far as special teams, that is honestly probably one of the more concerning things. Obviously, kicker, no concerns about that. BT Potter has a ton of experience, but in camp, it was a little bit of an up and down for Aiden Swanson, who's supposed to be the replacement for Will Spires at punter. Supposedly had a rough punting day, enough that Dabo Swinney said it ruined his whole day, and he almost didn't want to do punting for, until the end of camp, so he wouldn't have to think about it for a while. But Aiden Swanson bounced back a little bit seems to have gotten some consistency, and it's between him and then maybe BT Potter being both the kicker and the punter. But I think ideally they want Aiden Swanson to pull that out. So we'll see. Obviously, I would say that those are two of the greater concerns. I think that you pretty much pointed them out pretty well there, and gonna have to see how it turns out.
David, it's interesting. The special teams for the Gamecocks is almost a flip-flop. I think they feel good about Kai Kroger if he's healthy, the punter, and a lot of options in the return game. But whereas BT Potter is a solid kicker for Clemson, got to replace Parker White, the former walk-on who leaves the school as the all-time leading scorer. How do you see the battle going there?
Well, a place kicker, Gene, it seems to be that Mitch Jeter will probably win that job. He's been a little bit ahead of Alex Herrera in preseason camp and really through last spring. Jeter is a scholarship kid that they brought in specifically to replace Parker White. Ended up getting an extra year out of White because of the pandemic. But they gave a scholarship to a kicker out of high school, which is usually not the norm. They usually invite those guys as walk-on. And then, once they have their kicker selected, they go ahead and put him on Scully. But Mitch Jeter's been here a couple of years. He's been mostly the kickoff specialist, big, strong leg. He's a guy that has been very accurate in camp, so I expect him to be the starter. But you mentioned Kai Kroger, Gene, and, Kai, right before camp started, hurt the one part of himself that he couldn't afford to hurt, which was his punting foot. So he's been out, and he has started kicking in camp. They're optimistic that he will be back for the opener, but in case he isn't, all of the guys have been getting a tryout. So like John said, with BT Potter, could he punt and kick? That could be Mitch Jeter in the opener, and he'd also be doing kickoffs, which if you're going to do it, you can really only do it one game, or else those guys are probably going to get worn out pretty quick. But they have a lot of options at the other spots. Herrera could punt and do kickoffs. He did some kickoffs last year. William Joyce, who's a redshirt freshman walk-on, he's a guy who could end up being the punter. And one thing you also got to look at is Kai Kroger was the team's holder on place kicks as well. And if you go back and look at so many kicks over the past 2 years, high snap, Kai had to pull him down and they still went through. Do not underestimate the value of a really good holder, and South Carolina might be breaking in one of those, at least for the first game this year. So they need to get Kroger back, and they need him back, get him back as quickly as possible.
Welcome again, folks, to Beyond the Headlines, the PostandCourier.com's award-winning concept program that really takes you into deep dives into some of the cool things that we cover. And a reminder, again, you can submit questions in the Q&A function on your Zoom there. We're talking South Carolina and Clemson football and a season preview for 2022. Guys, I see a really cool ceiling there behind Cloninger. So let's talk about ceilings. Spencer Rattler, and I'm going to ask you, John, about Will Shipley. Spencer Rattler, David, I believe the single season record for touchdown passes at South Carolina is 29, held by Steve Tannehill in the mid-90s. I believe that it's quite the rarity for a Gamecock quarterback to be selected in the NFL draft, especially a 7-round draft. And all SEC, Heisman, those are kinds of things you don't usually associate with a Gamecock quarterback. Out of those things I mentioned, are some of those possibilities for Spencer Rattler at a high ceiling?
Well, some of them are very possible. I mean, it just depends how much they want to put the ball in his hands and have him throw it. Of course, with USC's, being banged up a little bit right now at running back, there might be leaning on him to throw the ball more. Then again, when you have a multi-use talent like Jaheim Bell, I'll go ahead and say it, fellas, especially with the status of USC's running backs, I would bet a good sum that Jaheim Bell takes the first carry of South Carolina's football season as a running back, because they'll line him up back there and say, it's coming, but can you, especially Georgia State, can you stop it? You might be geared to stop Marshawn Lloyd, who's, kind of a short, squat guy, Juju McDowell, short, fast guy, but can you stop 6'4" and 230 of rampaging tight end? Probably not. So that'd be my personal prediction, especially with Christian Beal-Smith being banged up and out. But we will see what happens. For Rattler particularly, the ceiling is really, out of reach for him for what he can do. He's come in, he's prepared for it. They know what he can do, and he's got the targets to do it. Of course, passing touchdowns are a chancy thing. What if you hit a guy for a 60-yard bomb and he gets tripped on the 1-yard line? Stuff like that. So we'll see. But, if everything goes well and you get a solid start, I expect that Heisman talk to really start picking up. But as we all know, fellas, a lot of folks go in with, say, a list of 10 Heisman frontrunners, and they never come off that list no matter what, unless you just do something extraordinary, like have a Steve McNair-like season and kind of get into the nation's consciousness. So we'll see what happens, but they definitely know that Rattler can do all of those things.
John, Will Shipley had a heck of a freshman year. He played even better toward the end. And now, in theory, at least, he's going to have improved quarterback play to help him find some larger holes. It was interesting at SEC Media Days, Greg McElroy, of all people, he's a former Alabama quarterback, at SEC Media Days was asked, who's your underdog Heisman Trophy candidate, and ruffling a lot of feathers by picking somebody outside the SEC. And he said, Will Shipley. Is Will Shipley potentially an all ACC guy, an ACC Player of the Year candidate, a Heisman guy? What do you think, John?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question, just because it's a three-headed monster in that backfield. I mean, you're going to have Kobe Pace, you're going to have to feed. And Phil Maffa was the guy they wanted to redshirt, and then they had so many different injuries and things going on that he ended up playing, and he's full go as well. Will Shipley, how many carries is he going to get as opposed to those other two guys? I mean, to get the Heisman, to get first team all ACC, all of that, it's going to be interesting. But in terms of the talent level, I mean, a guy that is special in terms of his ability to see cutback lanes. And he admitted during this preseason camp that he things were moving really fast. I mean, when he got out there at first, I mean, the Georgia game, he says he didn't know what the heck he was doing. And then the Pittsburgh game, he had that, infamous drop where they could have been up 14-0 on a seam route down the middle. And he said sometimes the big moments were just a little too big for him. That just, there was a little bit of anxiety, nervousness being that freshman. But he's obviously settled in. He's a guy who's got a tremendous work ethic. I mean, nobody's ever questioned that. Definitely got a lot of drive and a lot of ability too. So, I mean, I would expect as a sophomore him to take that jump that a lot of athletes take from freshman to sophomore year, having a year under his belt. The offensive line should be better. And like you said, the quarterback play, they're hoping will be better, whether it's DJ Uiagalelei or Cade Klubnik. So, the potential is there for a really big season for Will Shipley. It's just about how many carries does he get in that mix.
Guys, let's talk a little bit about schedules. I hate to oversimplify things and, pit Gamecocks against Tigers, but this really fits. David, it's kind of been my position here that this team could be really, really improved this season in Shane Beamer's second year. And because of that brutal schedule, namely with a home win over Auburn be replaced by a road game at Arkansas and having to play the Gators of Florida on the road instead of at home, that you're just maybe not going to see that in the record. And John, on the flip side, it's kind of a easy call to say that Clemson, working its way through that difficult gauntlet of Georgia Tech, Furman, Louisiana Tech, and maybe Wake Forest without Sam Hartman, has some time to work things out and could be 4-0, and you still really don't know about them. So, David Cloninger, your thoughts on the Gamecocks there?
It's going to be tough, Gene. I often go into every season and say that, it's really tough to predict things because South Carolina generally has about 3 nearly guaranteed losses on its schedule every year, those being Clemson, Georgia, and Texas A&M. Now, of course, anything can happen. A team that had a 4-win season a few years ago went to Georgia, who was ranked 3rd at the time, on the road and won. So you never know what will happen, but those teams, right now their talent level is just so far above South Carolina. You're like, well, it could happen, but you're probably not going to get those. And then the second game is at Arkansas. You got a game at Kentucky, which is going to be a very good team this year. assuming they get Chris Rodriguez back for most of the season. And then, of course, you've got some games against Tennessee, Missouri, and then you mentioned Florida. I mean, I look at Florida and think that it's always going to be tough because it's on the road, but I don't think the talent level of that team is that good. And South Carolina's that's one I think that they could definitely win. The game at Arkansas is probably a toss-up where, to me, because they're playing Kentucky in the 6th game of the season, I believe, probably not going to win that one. So it's going to be tough. It always is, especially on the SEC road. But if they can find a way to just get the Tennessee and Missouri games, which are both at home, and then you get that Florida game, it's going to be, okay, well, you've set yourself up for a very nice season and a nice bowl destination. And, of course, there is the case of this too, Gene. If somehow you go to Arkansas and you win, you're 2-0, assumedly, and then you got Georgia at home, high noon on week 3. Crazy things can happen in the 3rd game of the season, but we'll table that until they get back from Arkansas.
John, how about the Tigers and how that schedule plays out for what they want, which is to get back in the playoff for the 7th time in 8 seasons?
Yeah, I mean, like you alluded to, I think that obviously the beginning of the schedule does give them kind of a little bit of a runway to get going, figure things out, both on the offensive line and also with the quarterback in terms of how he's playing DJ Uiagalelei and how Cade Klubnik is operating behind center in the time he gets. But like you said, Georgia Tech, Furman, Louisiana Tech, I mean, I would think those are wins. If Sam Hartman isn't available for that road trip, you look at that last year, just the difference in the lines. I mean, the defensive line versus Wake Forest line, that's a pretty good matchup for them. And then you get to the tricky part of the schedule, which is NC State at home. Obviously, Devin Leary and that team, that's a pretty good team. Obviously lost in double overtime last year. You got to get by that one. But then you get a little bit of a run there with, road trips to Boston College and Florida State. Should be able to win those games, Syracuse. And then the big ones towards the end then are Notre Dame, that road trip. Obviously, Notre Dame is always one of the better teams in the country. Louisville gave Clemson trouble last year on the road. That could be a little bit of a trap game between the Notre Dame and Miami game. So that portion of the schedule will be difficult. And then obviously you have your rivalry game with South Carolina. So again, I think we at the beginning predicted probably about 11 wins, but you never know. And especially with injuries, I mean, there are a couple games there that Clemson definitely is in danger of losing if they're not on their A game.
Folks, we have arrived at the much anticipated lightning round portion of Beyond the Headlines, the Clemson and South Carolina football preview. In 15 seconds, guys, give me one surprise player, somebody who you think is either underrated, completely off the radar, maybe a good player that people know about, you think is going to be an absolute star. I will start and say, for instance, that I think at Clemson that Jeremiah Trotter, the linebacker who's going to start now for Skalski, I think this guy's going to be tremendous, like all-American candidate caliber. And at Clemson, I know Jalen Foster leaves big shoes to fill, but David, from what I've read and talked to people about, I think Devontae Reed's going to be really good. So David, 15 seconds, surprise player. John, after David, 15 seconds, Clemson surprise player.
I don't know how much of a surprise it is because we've been hearing his name all camp, but freshman safety Nick Emanwori, local kid from Irmo. He's 6'4". He's got a real long arm, real lengthy frame. He's going to be a guy that plays as one of those backup spots in safety, and he's going to be playing a lot.
John?
I'll go with Rook Arororo, which is a guy who last year actually emerged a little bit because of injuries to Brian Brzee and Tyler Davis, but hearing really good things about his development. I mean, he's actually putting himself in the mix to be an NFL type prospect coming into this year. So obviously everybody talks about Brzee and Davis and all those defensive ends, but I think Rook Arororo could have a big year at defensive tackle.
All right. Well, thanks, John and David, and thanks everyone for watching. Thanks to postandcourier.com subscribers for your support. And I'd like to encourage the audience to check out our tremendously cool free newsletters, including a college sports newsletter at postandcourier.com/newsletter-sign up. And then specifically our premium Clemson and South Carolina content. You just saw how great David Cloninger and John Blau are in breaking down the Gamecocks and the Tigers. So for David's stuff, postandcourier.com, subscribe /Gamecocks now. And for John Blau's Clemson newsletter, postandcourier.com/subscribe/the_Tiger_take. Thanks so much for Beyond the Headlines. And if you'd like to watch this again, remember it was recorded and will be available soon.